Special thanks to Moonfly71 for allowing this story to be shared. Check the description for their details, and now, on to the story. So, you said you were some kind of zookeeper? The thick-limbed and heavy-bearded man asked, in a long southern drawl. What you doing all the way out here? Closest zoo is in Cincinnati, and that's 3 whole tanks of gas from here. The much smaller and weedy man sitting next to him shook his head with a light chuckle. He readjusted the glasses that slid down his face with the motion and brushed his thin brown hair out of his eyes. Cryptozoologist, he corrected gently, though I understand the confusion. It means that I study cryptids, creatures that as of yet have no concrete evidence of their existence. Urban legends, monsters you've only ever heard about. Bigfoot, Chupacabra, the Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, that kind of thing. The man swirled the completely untouched 2 fingers of amber liquid in front of him and shook his head. At least I want to study them. Can't really claim to do so if I haven't found hide nor hair of them, can I? He muttered dejectedly. The bearded workman nodded at the explanation. Ah, that makes a hell of a lot more sense than a zookeeper being out in these parts. The man downed his own glass of a much clearer and potent smelling substance in one swift swallow and set it down on the bar, upside down with an authoritative nod. Yes, sir, that makes a good bit more sense. Wouldn't know what a zookeeper could do out in the middle of the backwoods of Kentucky, but a crypto who's a Watson makes sense, especially if you haven't had any on-the-job experience yet. Whole state is crawling with stuff like you mentioned. Probably how everybody in your job gets started, I reckon. Send them down to Kentucky to get some experience and all that. The cryptozoologist stopped swirling his glass and turned his gaze to the man next to him. Excuse me? Well, I just figured it makes sense. Since we got all kinds of crazy, unexplainable creatures and folks around here, probably would be nice for a fella to figure out what all of them really are, you know? Nobody around here is a sciencey type. We just know enough to handle everything, such as it is, you know? Backwoods wisdom your granddaddy passed down, personal experiences and all that. The brown-haired man's eyes widened, and he set down the glass to fully turn in his stool to stare at the heavier-set man next to him. Excuse me, I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself, but are you telling me that you've seen things like I described, not just heard about them in bedtime stories or campfire tales, not just seen grainy photos taken by your cousin, or seen a silhouette at the edge of the woods at sunset, but actually seen them face to face? The big southerner looked a little confused at this odd but exceptionally polite northerner's strange excitement and insistence, but nodded. Yes, sir. Seen 'em, touched 'em, and shot more than a few myself when they've caused me problems. He paused and gave a bit of an awkward, sheepish smile. Maybe don't tell nobody about that last bit. If you're here to study 'em and all, might be they're endangered, and I don't want to go to jail for killing something that's tearing up my property and attacked my dog. The man seemed to fall back a bit on the bar stool, a hand wiping sweat off his brow as he looked at the stranger who he had been idly speaking with. I'm sorry, you've been nothing but astoundingly polite and patient with me, but you must understand that I find what you're saying very hard to believe. Despite what you've clearly assumed from what I've told you, cryptozoology is not an accepted scientific field. People who research these creatures are considered crackpots, who are either good-intentioned men wasting their time on ceaseless optimism, or snake oil salesmen trying to con honest people out of their money. I believe the things I'm looking for exist, don't get me wrong, but to hear a random stranger, by all means an ordinary man as far as I can tell, just tell me that he's seen so many of these creatures in a populated and fully explored state like Kentucky is just surreal. Someone would have said something. There would be a digital record. The southern man was quiet for a moment, mulling it over. Well, first off, you got something wrong there. Calling Kentucky ordinary and fully explored, that ain't right. He paused, clearly seeking permission to continue, and the cryptozoologist waved him on eagerly. The man obliged with a nod. See, Kentucky is a special state. In the West, we've got cornfields that would make Wyoming jealous. Big, flat cornfields where anything can hide away in before harvest season. Cornfields that always rustle at night, and the stuff that's in 'em ain't anything those detractors of your subject would recognize. Folks are always disappearing into those big old fields away from towns, mostly strangers and tourists. Folks who hear the corn rustle and don't know to just ignore it. They go poking around when they hear a bump in the night or a strange song from those big old fields, and you don't see 'em again." He gave a deep chuckle and shook his head. "Us locals, we try to warn 'em. Mind your own business, we say. Stay out of stuff that ain't got anything to do with you, we tell 'em. We've minded ours for generations, you know. Of course, anyone who's ever worked a harvest has seen whatever's left of the things that get stuck in the combines. Things that bleed purple or orange or have organs and bones so hard they can't be mulched by tractor engines. Sometimes the stuff they leave behind means we got to toss a whole batch because the gunk won't wash out or because it melts through the metal on the harvesters. Luckily, down in the south, we got enough redneck engineers to send you into space in a rocket made of duct tape and spot welds, so we patched that equipment up real quick." The would-be cryptozoologist looked down at his swirling glass and then drained it in one swallow and set it on the table, looking dazed. So you see evidence of real, actual monsters in your midst, and you just ignore it?" The bigger man scratched his head and then nodded with authority after a moment. "I suppose that's one way of looking at it. We deal with them when whatever they are get uppity. If the skittering in the mines starts collapsing shafts or attacking us, we put them down. Or, if the things that live in the corn break our fences or kill our animals, we burn a field or two and file it as a nice fat tax write-off for a bad case of vole weevils we had to burn to stop the spread or something. First rule of rednecks, son, you never call any cops unless you're related to them. Especially when they'll just complicate something that mostly handles itself." He smiled at the confused expression on the northern researcher's face and clapped a companionable hand on his shoulder. "Relax, man. That ain't even all of it. That's just Western Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky critters. Cryptids, you called them. They're a whole other world." I'm almost scared to ask what the difference could possibly be. "Hey," the man chuckled. "Geography, mostly. At least, that's my thoughts on it. Eastern part of the state's more mountainous. Bigger forests and less open, flat farmland. The furthest east you can go, this state touches the Appalachian Mountains." The Kentucky man's eyes got distant as he stared down at the bar's scarred wooden top, seemingly seeing something else in the pitted, work-polished hardwood. "Them mountains are old, fella. There are things in there that even the original inhabitants of them, before any European fella put one foot on those cold peaks, treated with healthy respect and fear. You live up in those mountains, or even just around them, and you see things." I said calling Kentucky fully explored was wrong. I meant those mountains. No man has seen everything in those hills, and no man is meant to. There's a difference, living in the East rather than the West. When I lived in Western Kentucky, we understood that the land was ours, and that the things that came from the corn and the tunnels were the interlopers. Things from other places infringing on a land that wasn't theirs, new things that didn't belong. Up in the East, though, even in the towns and cities, everything still feels wild and untamed. In the East, you just know in your bones that you're the interloper. In Eastern Kentucky, the natural residents let us stay, let us hang around on their land and in their mountains on a whim. But make no mistake, stranger, it's theirs, and anyone who forgets or ignores that disappears on a long hike or on a backwoods dirt road. The bespectacled man nodded quietly, enraptured. So in the West, where you're originally from, you just ignored the cryptids, but in the East, you learned to, what, live in harmony with them? Kinda. Suppose we do with some of them, trade with them, feed them, know they're in our midst and not stop to bring it up and make it awkward. You ever go to a Denny's or a Waffle House early in the morning before the sun comes up in Eastern Kentucky, and you'll see deer hunters, coal miners, and things that everyone knows aren't quite human. But their money spends as well as anyone else's, and they deserve their privacy as much as any other folks around here. Most of them we just live and let live. We don't interact with them beyond seeing them in the dark when you take a walk, or hearing them in the woods behind your house. Occasionally you find a deer or a turkey that's been ravaged beyond the scope of any bobcat or bear, you know, from the way the trees are scarred or the prints on the ground that it ain't normal. That's when you keep walking. If it ain't a human corpse, it ain't your business. The man paused to order another drink, this time a larger mug of beer rather than a shot. He nursed it softly for a moment after the bartender slid the foaming beverage across the bar. You asked for personal experience? I've seen big figures with shaggy bodies that leave prints the size of tennis rackets in the mud and snow, things that were probably the things folks call Bigfoot, but I never felt like bothering that neighbor enough to ask. They've never caused me any trouble, so I don't cause them none. There's a thing that screeches at night, too. Scares the dog sometimes, but ever since it started leaving big bones on my doorstep for him, he's been right happy whenever he hears the screaming. Its footprints are big and clawed, and I'm pretty sure the hunter and those hikers that disappeared were its handiwork. But that hunter was an arrogant SOB from out of state, and I know for a fact he was looking to trap bobcat kits and bear cubs. And those hikers were college kids that wouldn't listen to nobody about drinking and partying up in the mountains, didn't pick up their trash and lit fires, and shat in places that deserved more respect. A small notebook had made its way into the hands of the awed researcher, and the noise of pen on paper filled the suddenly empty and quiet bar. And there's a cave that whispers, about a mile west of my cabin. The rocks say things that draw you inside, and the glow coming from the center ain't anything natural. It's like a color you can't describe with words. I ain't ever gone deeper than the mouth, but sometimes I sit and listen on quiet days. Put a lawn chair up and watch the sunset in the company of a thing I don't think my mind fully gets. Every once in a while, I'll get an idea or inspiration I know wasn't from me, the answer to what's wrong with my truck that I've been trying to fix all week. A recipe for Nana's cornbread that was destroyed when the basement flooded years ago. And sometimes a whisper for odd things that I feel the desire to place in the cave mouth. Cheez-Its, a disposable phone, a DVD player, and a tablet. The man gave a laugh and a shake of his head. I think that one's like you, stranger. It wants to know things, understand them. To it, whatever it is, I imagine we're the cryptids, you know? I bet you could sit in that lawn chair for hours back and forth. Though I wouldn't go past the cave mouth, I reckon there's some info on both sides that just don't need to be shared. Some boundaries you don't cross, and the line between the mouth of that cave and the inside is one of them. He sighed and gave a soft smile. But those are just the social ones, most of them folks and critters. They mind their own business, and we mind ours. Yes, sir. This is Kentucky. We might blaze trails off the beaten path and drive the back roads, but we ain't stupid enough to go poking the bear while it's guarding its cubs. This place is special, half tamed and half wild, half new country and warm winds, half ancient places and cold rain. We know when to mind our own damn business and when to give a kick and a shotgun blast. I reckon that's why they're still here, these things you're searching for. We ain't killed them all off, but we ain't let them drive us out of the homes we built either. We stand on a divide, aware enough of what's out there to know it exists, and enough stubborn will to refuse to let it scare us away. But we've got just enough wisdom to know how to avoid an all-out war. The man seemed to become more sure of himself now, and spoke with authority, a deceived nod, prefacing his words. What's that old saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? That's what happens here. Don't go into the corn when it rustles, and that bastard won't be able to catch you by surprise. Don't go pissing on an ancient ritual site, and that massive shape in the night won't care enough to rip you apart. Give the fella whose skin don't fit quite right and whose eyes are just slightly too orange to be human a cup of Mama's iced tea along with those directions he asked for, and send him off with a clap on the back. If that nice woman you met at the bar don't want to enter your house till you invite her in, you best make sure you open the door and apologize for the rudeness. And if Cousin Eddie's iron allergy seems to leave more burns than hives, well, ain't none of your damn business why. He's family, and that's that. Seemingly finally done, a silence settled onto the two men, now alone at the bar, with only the bartender polishing a glass quietly at the far edge of the counter. The cryptozoologist flipped through his notes several times over the course of those silent minutes, checking and making slight changes to them before he finally sat the pen and pad of paper down and took a deep breath and slowly released it. What you explained, it's almost like a self-stabilized ecosystem, like as if dozens of invasive species found a way to live in harmony. And I'm including humans in that list. It's so strange, and I admit it's difficult to believe, but if everything you said is true then it almost sounds like poking my nose into this could cause untold problems. If everything in Kentucky functions with this strange here, no strangeness. See no strangeness, idea. Wouldn't actively studying and categorizing these things cause issues? Wouldn't people like me just be a threat to a fragile ecosystem? The man grabbed his hair in his hands and yanked for a moment, releasing a garbled yell of frustration before slowly releasing his grip. You okay, friend? Gah, no, I am not. He snapped, sorry, it's just so frustrating. I get told that everything I've ever wanted, proof that my field of study is real and valid, is right in front of me. And at the same time, it's made painfully obvious to me that I can't study it because doing so could ruin the very thing I wish to admire. It's like being inches away from the last Stradivarius on Earth and knowing a single touch could crumble the entire instrument to pieces. You're worried about disturbing the environment of the things while you study them? That's basically what you're saying. The researcher nodded dejectedly and slumped into the table, head in his hands. Yeah, pretty much. Well, sounds to me like all you'd need is a guide. Somebody who'd know how to get your research done without setting nothing off. A resident, somebody who knows this state and all its people and critters like he knows his own family. A big, strong old fella. Yeah, that's what you need. Somebody to lug your big, impressive Cryptids wizards gadgets up them hills and through them cornfields. Who knows how to set up cameras and live traps without disturbing the balance of nature? A big, all-mountain man. The countryman tapped a finger against his head with a wide grin. Don't suppose you just met any fellas like that, did you? The would-be scientist pulled his head up and looked at the man with an excited, incredulous stare. You're offering to help me conduct my research? We just met. I don't even know your name? Well, we can fix that. Name's Cletus. Good to meet you. Cletus extended one massive, calloused hand out to him. After a moment of surprise, he took it in his smaller, softer one. Nice to meet you, Cletus. I'm Lucas Arcadian. I think this might be the beginning of a beautiful partnership. You know what, Lucas? I reckon you're right.